Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, welcome! Quite some time ago, I released this video explaining all of Terraria Calamity's lore. However, like all good games out there, Calamity receives updates and hotfixes. But as time goes on, so too does my knowledge of the lore increase, especially with the most recent updates changing everything we know about certain topics. In my last video, I wasn't nearly as confident as I wanted to be, and definitely not as well versed in editing as I am now. That's why I'm here. It was only a matter of time until I needed to update the old timeline anyway. I figured, why not after the first big update to this mod pack in almost 4 years? The Brainstorm update and its cleverly named hotfix update, Brain Surgery, added many new things to the lore, which I have already discussed in this video here. This video, of course, integrates those changes into the overall timeline. You can think of this video as being a combination of the two. Additionally, I got quite a bit of things wrong with my speculation in the last video as well, pushing me to release the corrected Crusades video. I hope to mitigate that as much as possible in this one. Like the last one, developer statements don't matter to me here, and I'm solely focusing on what's in the game. I have to mention that, in the lore discussion tab of the official Calamity Discord, there is a lore document that you can read yourself. It includes what's in the game as well as all the newest developer confirmations. I personally don't like adding developer confirmations to my videos since they aren't in the game yet, are quickly subject to change, and lore additions usually come with their fair share of contradictions that usually subsequently need to be addressed. You know, all that wonderful building of a fictional universe stuff. If you decide to read the lore doc instead of watching this, I wouldn't blame you. I appreciate your time nonetheless, and I know the lore discussion tab just loves new people coming in and asking a ton of questions. Just as a last disclaimer, this video is based off of what is in the game as of Calamity 2.1.2, released late February of 2026, not what is in the Discord lore document. The story takes place within 5 eras: Creation, Draconic, the Deific, the Crusades, and present day. Dates are not provided until the Deific era onward, making it difficult to place Creation and Draconic within a specific time frame. Additionally, the Creation era is not named in the game officially. It's merely just the name I gave this era based on its position in the timeline. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get started, shall we? Our story begins where most great stories begin, at the beginning of time, with the creation of the universe eons ago. We have no information on how the Terraria universe came to be, much less the other dimensions present. The distortion and an unnamed fissure of broken space-time which leaches energy from our own. We don't know the relationship between the distortion and Terraria's dimension, but we'll go into the specifics much later. At one point, a void-born entity would establish his home inside of a small pocket dimension, using a fissure in order to siphon energy from our own to keep it stable. This being would later become known as Phobos, the Moon Lord, and given time, Terraria would become very familiar with this name. The energy he siphons from our universe is not what you and I think of when we hear energy. Instead of the thermal or chemical energy that comes to mind, it comes in the form of mana, an innate property of all matter, living or not. This mana will have numerous applications down the line, but a key property of mana is that it gives matter its mass. When nothing else is present, it tends to gravitate towards itself, and, given it enough time, form into the larger celestial bodies of the universe, galaxies, stars, and the like. Another innate property of the ambient mana in space is the generation of astral infection. In the star birthing process, on rare occurrences, a star will grow larger than its own gravity can support. The overwhelming pressure of so much condensed mana in one place leads to the formation of astral infection. When a star reaches this point, the astral infection begins to degenerate the star, like a cancer. But the infection is not what one thinks of when one hears the term infection. It has a mind of its own, and it has a will that it projects across whatever landscape it develops on. It is capable of affecting all matter it comes across, living or not. The only weakness it has is the inability to affect those with sapient minds, minds able to grasp the true form of the cosmos. It is the sacred duty of the Ashram Deus to consume those stars that have fallen to the astral infection, so that it may not spread any further. Alternatively, the Ashram Deus will focus on the largest stars for other means of sustenance, knowing that they will soon begin to develop astral infection naturally. We don't know how long the race of the Ashram Deus have been doing this, but it can be inferred that it has been for as long as mana has existed in the universe. Maybe someone or something created them. We can't know for sure. If the Ashram Deus ever disappeared, astral infection would surely grow out of control, eventually consuming all matter in the entire universe. Shifting to a more local area, a star that has not yet grown big enough to naturally produce astral infection would form in what would become Terraria's solar system. At the same time, the planet Terraria itself would form, along with its moon. Terraria, seemingly being the more dense celestial body, would force the sun and moon to orbit around the planet, with the sun orbiting just outside that of the moon's orbit. Solar eclipses, blood moons, where the primordial light of the sun would reflect off the moon onto Terraria's surface, would be quite common. The moon also had different phases due to the way Terraria and the sun would sometimes align with the moon. There is currently no plausible explanation for the pumpkin and frost moon. It is likely some magical force that we do not know the mechanics of quite yet. The planet itself contained its own soul, something that every being on Terraria would possess later on. Terraria was not the only planet in the local area, however. Far out in the system, farther than the sun and moon, laid Mars. Life would flourish there as well, and a civilization would develop. They became known as the Martians. Nothing was known about their society or way of life. Following the destruction of their planet at the hands of otherworldly beings, the few that escaped would become a militaristic spacefaring civilization, frequently sending out probes to scan for resources and plundering any world that they would come across. They would not discover Terraria for quite some time, however. Over a significant amount of time, the continents and oceans on the surface of the planet would be given shape and form. Meteors would frequently collide with the planet's surface, explaining the sometimes horrible landscape you may find yourself trying to traverse. In some cases, these meteors would be large enough to fling matter into the atmosphere, creating the planetoids in lower orbit. The more mana-dense meteors that fell would spawn meteor heads, rather weak beings of pure mana. These would be the first signs of mana-born life on Terraria, but they would certainly not be the last. It is unknown just how many continents there were on the surface, but over time, these would flourish into the many biomes you see today. The forests, deserts, jungle, oceans, taigas, and mountains, and the abyss were the primary biomes of Terraria. Perhaps the most baffling of these biomes was namely the abyss, and possibly close to the shoreline, it was equally as mysterious as it was deep. The eons of tectonics underneath the surface would not seal or crush it, implying some sort of magical or other force keeping it open until present day. There were many primordial forces involved in the creation and evolution of Terraria. The light from the sun was one of said forces. The elementals were a different story though. We don't know how the elementals came to be, and we only know of a few currently. Anahita, the water elemental, the unnamed earth elemental, and the brimstone elemental. And lastly, there is implied to be something similar to an air elemental, though it is not proven. The elementals claim dominion over their respective domains, the oceans for Anahita, underworld for brimstone, caverns for earth, and presumably the sky for the hinted at air elemental. Despite her location in the deepest depths of the world, Brimstone was undoubtedly the strongest of her sisters. She held fundamental control over, well, Brimstone. Some called it flame powers, some call it heat powers, but humans would eventually know it to be Havoc, the inevitable sundering of all order and fire. Wherever the elementals would go, fragments would sometimes drift away from their main body, becoming isolated and becoming the smaller elemental-type enemies you see around the world. A few examples are the Ice Elemental from Anahita and the Cloud Elemental from the implied Air Elemental. Although they themselves are called elementals, they are but a piece of a greater being. By the end of the Creation Era, the elementals would either be laying in a dormant state or so isolated from the world that they might as well have not existed at all. Anahita would call the depths of the ocean her home, and the Brimstone Elemental would begin her slumber in the lowest depths of the world, right underneath the abyss in a place known as the Brimstone Crag. Although the elementals were in indefinite solitude, their broken fragments would inhabit Terraria in their place, being commonplace even in present day. Around the close of the Creation Era, the Underworld would not only see the arrival of her matron, the Brimstone Elemental, but also the development of two races of beings. One was the race of obsidian-scaled serpents that ruled territory in the Underworld under their liege. The other civilization were the demons, a strength-based society ruled by a single demon lord. The demons practiced many religions, of which usually involved ritual sacrifices, utilizing their oath blades specifically made for the task. To reach the position of demon lord, a demon would have to take the head of the current lord in ritual combat. The title of demon lord was coveted by many demons, but few would ever put forth the effort to have a chance at attaining it. The demon civilization would see the rise and fall of numerous great demon lords by the close of the Creation Era. Slimes would also come to exist during this time, capable of absorbing and/or utilizing anything they touched. The world would see countless different forms come to exist throughout time. They could even absorb each other, growing to massive sizes as big as buildings. No matter how large they seemed to grow, however, they were still very weak, unless of course they had absorbed a powerful mana-dense object, changing their properties. Even if you cut chunks off the main body, the pieces would still technically be considered alive, only in a form that did not allow it to function in any meaningful way. Though they would still maintain the memories of their original slime, and so continue to work in the interest of their parent slime. However, despite the countless properties that set the slimes at an advantage, the world would only ever view them as a nuisance, unlike the powerful beings that were about to change the history of Terraria forever. The Draconic Era, the first era in recorded history, and likewise the first era given an official name, mainly by Yharim himself, as well as the Bestiary. As it stands now, recorded history only goes back 1887 years, with the start of the Draconic Era speculated to have started long before that. We know from Drayton's findings that this era must have started at least 2,000 years ago. Any later than that makes no plausible sense. What we do know is that the Draconic Era began at the same time that Terraria saw the arrival of the dragons. Though not gifted their auric powers quite yet, they were still extremely strong, stronger than anything the world had ever seen yet, including the elementals. Their race would eventually span the entire world. They weren't the only form of life that would begin to form on Terraria, however. The underground jungle would see the arrival of numerous different types of insects, including wasps, bees, and hornets. Some bees and their hives would grow rather large, becoming larger than your average human for some queen bees. Some amount of time later, Terraria's world soul would somehow become fragmented, and to the surprise of the dragons, they would be gifted the auric souls. It is unknown just how many souls were gifted to the dragons, with only a handful actually being recorded to have existed. It is unclear if the world soul was fragmented prior to the dragons being created, or if the world soul gave birth to them in some supernatural way. In the Dragon Folly lore item, it is implied that the race of the dragons were present before they gained their powers, saying that dragons who were born after all the Auric souls had been gifted to their kind were forced to make do without, forever outside of the cycle of rebirth. It is hinted that someone or something chose a select group of dragons and offered them the power of an Auric soul. Souls were something that every living thing on Terraria, and apparently even the planet itself, possessed, to include the elementals and their fragments. The misuse of souls would become a recurring theme in the story of Calamity. The dragons, however, as far as we know, would not misuse this power, instead choosing to protect Terraria from all possible threats. Each Auric soul was tied to a fundamental force of Terraria, drawn directly from the world's fragmented soul, the two most important ones being the Soul of Rebirth and the Soul of Primordial Light, although there were many others. Zerotros, the current king of the dragon race, received the strongest soul, the Primordial Light Soul. Upon receipt of his Auric soul, he became a master at using sunlight to his advantage, in combat or not. This made him, by all accounts, the strongest of the Auric dragons. The Auric Soul of Rebirth was gifted to Yharim. Although not nearly as strong as the King of Dragons, Yharim's power was fundamentally more important to the dragon race than Zerotros' power over sunlight. The gifting of the power over rebirth to Yharim allowed the Auric dragons to be functionally immortal. The Auric dragons had their own home, named the Dragon Eyrie. Its characteristics remain largely a mystery, except for the few who were allowed to tread there. However, it is presumed, largely by Dradon, to be an unusually large sky island. Few others that weren't an Auric dragon were allowed to tread there. The Eyrie acted as a sort of religious sanctuary or holy ground. Upon the death of, or alternatively preparation for the death, of an Auric dragon, they would be laid to rest on the Eyrie so that Yharim could rebirth them while maintaining their Auric powers. The rebirthing process itself is also somewhat of a mystery. It could be entirely true that the Eyrie had nothing to do with the process itself, but was simply the location that the dragons decided on for this ritual. The opposite could also be true, and the Eyrie could also be the only reason that the dragons even had their powers in the first place. We do know from later events that Yharim's attendance was required during the rebirthing ritual, or else the Auric soul, along with its power, would be lost forever. Amongst the Auric dragons were the quote, lesser dragons, those being dragons who still had their Auric powers, but were not nearly on the scale of Zerotros or Yharim in levels of importance. Dragons who had control over things like life, death, and even the storms that befell the lands. Although important powers, their survival, harshly put, was not paramount to the survival of the entire dragon race. Even less so were the dragons who unfortunately never received an Auric soul, and in tandem a power to go with it. As such, they were locked outside of Yharim's rebirthing ritual. It was only the Auric dragons that were so lucky as to be the guardians of Terraria for as long as Yharim was alive. Over time, the offspring of dragons with other similar races would cause numerous offshoot races to branch out and breed with those already impure species. The first of these offshoots was most definitely the Fishrons. Unlike the name implied, they were perfectly capable of surviving outside of the water, and even flight. While not nearly as strong as the pure-blooded dragons, and lacking their own Auric powers, they were fearsome hunters. Their lifespan is still unknown to this day, but the first Fishrons were spotted somewhere in the middle of the Draconic era. It is questionable how they grew to the sizes that they did with a diet that only consisted of certain types of sea worms. While the Fishrons grew to enjoy the open ocean and the food it provided to them, certain other offshoots would find their homes elsewhere. The Eidolon worms, despite lacking any Auric powers, flourished under the imaginable pressure of the abyss. They adapted to the harsh environment, like the many other species of aquatic life in the abyss at the time, and some would even grow to become as strong as their Auric brethren. Dragonfollies, considered to be siblings of the Auric dragons, would call the depths of the underground jungle their home. Amazing hunters in their own right, Their immense control of static electricity utilizing the flapping of their wings against their body set them at a solid advantage over the many species in the underground jungle. They maintained control over their territory fiercely. Their offspring, what we now know today as Draconic swarmers, were still strong in their own right, and closely resembled their parents. Some minor offshoots also existed in this time. Though not nearly as strong as their Auric brethren, wyverns resided in the sky alongside the Auric Dragon of Storm. Basilisks were very weak and can be found in numerous biomes today, and Pigarons, which were extremely weak landlocked variants of the Fishrons. There may have been many more, but due to events later in the timeline, you'll come to understand why there are not. The Auric Dragons were sapient, and they even had their own language, although very cryptic, with only one word known today, being Cthulhu, meaning Great Beast. The title of Cthulhu would only be given to creatures that had significant strength, commonly seen today through the eye and brain of Cthulhu. The dragons seemingly got along very well with the other races considered to be their relatives. However, there would be another species that arrived on Terraria in this era, one that would rewrite history and eventually alter the power balance of the planet forever. The Draconic era saw the first arrival of humans to Terraria. Nothing is known about how exactly the first humans came into existence. It could very well be true that they evolved from primitive animals, or equally likely that they are a product of the Auric Dragons. Over time, the humans, or other similar races, would find their way into almost every single biome on the planet. They were a quick evolving species, seemingly being able to survive and thrive almost anywhere, with or without the help of the dragons. In the underground jungle, small primitive villages would begin to form around the beehives. In a sort of symbiotic relationship, the villages would offer protection from the various creatures who hunted the bees, in exchange for shares of honey which fed the village dwellers. There wasn't just one village though. The citizens of the jungle wove an intricate system of villages all over the underground jungle, some of which are still seen to this day. At the heart of this system was Vernal Pass, the largest of the jungle villages, and acted as the hub. The Vernal Pass had a guardian, namely a warrior of great strength. His name was Braylor. There is very little information about Braylor in general, so I'm not able to go too in-depth with him. We'll get to him a little later though. The jungle settlers excelled in working with nature and its properties, commonly creating most of their tools, armor, and architecture with the resources from the underground jungle. The village's form of government followed what you'd expect from a tribe-like civilization, each village having their respective elders, likely held in great respect and whose opinions mattered the most. The lizard race was also in the deeper parts of the underground jungle, though extremely little is known about them until the Deific era, and it is likely that their civilization was in its infancy during this time. In the sky, under the protection of the Storm Dragon and the Wyverns, deeply in tune with the magic of the world, was Crusadia, a skyfaring civilization. Not much is known about them. Additionally, not much is also known about how the Sky Islands came into existence, aside from the fact presented by Dradon that they were not naturally produced by meteors striking the planet's surface. Although Terraria is a 2D game, the Sky Islands that made up the civilization of Crusadia are considered to be a sky archipelago, looking something a little like this. The citizens utilized re-enchanted aerolite in their architecture, and maybe even their own tools and armor, though little is known about the society and how Crusadia was governed. The cult who worshipped dragons endlessly would eventually come into existence, led by the lunatic cultist, who held them in immeasurable respect. Some of the lesser cultists would share this level of devotion to the Auric Dragons, but not with the Auric Dragons themselves, rather the offshoots. The followers of the Eidolon worms became so fixated with them that they found a way to mimic the worms, turning their bodies into something similar, allowing them to survive the depths and closely serve their new masters. The other cultists would construct their temple and burrow deep into the ground, almost reaching the underworld. This underground dungeon would eventually grow very large. large enough to house the entire cult and its followers. The cult had mages and warlocks that studied all manner of magic. After what seemed like years of expanding, they would discover something that defied all expectation, and defied all laws of what was physically thought to be possible at the time. There, at the bottom of the dungeon, they discovered an inert portal. The what? The cult did not know. It was likely that they didn't want to know. The cult would decide to keep it a secret, their most closely guarded secret. In fact, keeping it even from the Archdragons. What the cult didn't know was that this inert portal led to the Distortion, a separate dimension entirely. Of course, nothing would come of this discovery until much, much later. In the depths of the underworld, where the obsidian-scaled serpents and demons still reigned, almost a millennia ago, the settlers would explore far and wide. Reaching as far down as the Brimstone Crags, they would likely encounter imps, demons, and the serpents throughout their travels. The underworld settlers remained resilient though, eventually reaching the resting place of the Brimstone Elemental, who fell dormant countless years before. Upon seeing the outline of the woman, the settlers worshipped her like a deity. Pair that with the location of the abyss right above the Brimstone Crag and lack of demonic presence. The settlers would decide on this location for the world's first great city, the city of Azafir. The floor of the abyss was comprised of impossibly dense stone, deterring any adversaries from attempting an assault from above. Additionally, the territory that Azafir was founded upon was extremely hot in certain places, deterring any ground forces that could even make it past the giant chasm separating the crags from the rest of the underworld. The Brimstone Crag's exceptional heat dwarfed that of the underworld's normal magma. This super magma gave Azafir a head start in technology and magic alongside it, for the two were always locked in an arms race with each other. Azafir underwent industrial and military growth faster than any of the other civilizations of the time, eventually making it a hub for people of all trades. It underwent such growth that during its industrial period, brimstone fumes would rise through the bottom of the abyss and eventually reach the surface. This pollution would lead many species to die, and many to evolve to the new, even worse environment, and lead many people of the world to refer to the upper layer of the abyss as the Sulphurous Sea. Among the Azafiran ranks, there were necromancers and diabolists, who upon completion of their training earned special sigils that were proof of their power. The Azafirians had all manner of warlocks, magicians, necromancers, bladesmiths, you name it, and Azafir probably had them. While there is quite a bit of knowledge on the hows and whys of Azafir's foundation, the writers don't go too deep into the specifics of culture and society inside the city, only that most of them seem to worship the Brimstone Elemental as the city's silent matron. The justice system was rather cruel, fashioning obsidian skulls to those criminals that did unspeakable acts and forcing them to wander the underworld, the obsidian skull acting as a reminder to all not to break the laws of the first great city. Much like the lizard race, but through a different magic, guardians and other constructs were created to assist the Azafiran mages. Wolfram, a versatile metal that was easy to work with by even those who have little technical skills, was used as a currency in most civilizations. The people with probably the most important skill sets were named the Forge Masters. Only the Forge Masters could utilize the magma of the Brimstone Crags to its full potential. The greatest Forge Master, whose name is lost to history, created a legendary set of weapons: Hellkite, a blade forged through passion, and Hellporn, a gun forged through Buteus inspiration. Whoever wielded them, or what these were made for, is unknown. Azafir did not have many adversaries either way. The civilizations were relatively peaceful to each other, especially because of the considerable distance between each other. Azafir would only fall victim to the occasional demon attack here and there. Long before the founding of Azafir, the demon civilizations saw the rise and fall of many great demon lords. Chief among them was their last demon lord, who brought great prosperity to the race of the demons. No demon could ever best them in ritual combat, nor did any demon ever want to, in fear that they could not live up to their expectation. Demonkind would never know unity again after the death of their greatest demon lord. In the Ilmarin Sea, an ocean connecting the two smaller continents that the game takes place on, countless species of aquatic life, different to that of the abysses, would flourish. This included all manner of sharks, jellyfish, and sea serpents, among many others. The Ilmarin Sea had an average amount of natural predators, with great sharks, sea serpents, and large aquatic worms, also known as scourges. The Ilmarin people, a race of humanoid creatures that resembled seahorses, would also inhabit this ocean. It is unknown just how the Ilmarian people came into existence, but we do know that for the majority of the Draconic era, they would be split into different tribes. The early Ilmarians were not as sapient as the Ilmarians we know today, and therefore their development was much slower than that of Azathirs or the Vernal Pass. Over time, they would call upon and tame different sea creatures to assist them in their developments. Nidrians being the most important, acting as their loyal steeds well into the future. The Ilmarian race would accomplish many feats, but not in this era. Their time to shine would not come until much later. All of these civilizations would utilize resources mined by the various expeditions sent out. These expedition parties would sometimes utilize granite golems to assist them in their mining endeavors. These civilizations would welcome and utilize blood moons, which, if you remember correctly, is just primordial light from the sun reflecting off of the moon onto the planet's surface, to train their soldiers in warfare. The effects of the blood moon are mysterious, and nobody really knows or cares to figure out why they have the effect that they do on people. Notably, the effects on aquatic life are much more intense due to the way sunlight interacts with water, as seen in the Dread Nautilus. For the next few hundred years or so, humanity and dragonkind, relative or not, pure-blooded or not, would thrive, and the world would know peace. But nothing lasts forever. One day, an aberrant behemoth from beyond the star— Oh, sorry, old script. A void-born horror would set his sights upon Terraria. After residing in his broken fissure of spacetime for countless years, Phobos would arrive at Terraria. The Arctic Dragons immediately felt his presence and began to wage war against him. The dragons quickly realized that Phobos was to be taken seriously, and very well had the power and means to permanently wound the Arctic Dragons and wipe the planet clean of life. Upon the death of the first Arctic Dragon at his hands, the Arctic Dragons subsequently realized that not only did Phobos have the power to siphon souls, but also to dominate or exercise control over them. It is unknown to this day whether that meant that Phobos could use the power for himself indefinitely, or if the power expired after certain conditions were met. Either way, the dragons were fighting a losing battle. What made it worse was the cleverness and critical thinking of Phobos. Utilizing minuscule shards from the souls of 4 of the more powerful dragons, he made the 4 pillars. The celestial pillars came each with their own shield, and to defeat one would have to weaken the shield by defeating a certain number of enemies spawned by the pillar. Using the Soul of Storm, ripping Crusades' defender from them, he made the Vortex Pillar. It was the job of the spawns from the Vortex Pillar to erase all mundane life, actively waging war or not. Seemingly coming in infinite droves, the first pillar turned the battle into a battle of 2 fronts, making this already difficult battle even more so. The dragons, however, were not nearly prepared for what came next. Phobos, utilizing the Arc Soul of the Mind, created a second pillar, the Nebula Pillar. The Nebula Pillar's spawns focused on bending and warping the minds of every being it came across, acting as supreme counterintelligence. It disabled all means of finding any countermeasures against Phobos or his armies. Upon the defeat of the Dragon of Life, he would create the third pillar, the Stardust Pillar. Its troops found particular utility in searching and picking off the stronger beings that could pose a threat to the Vortex Pillar. To give those of you a sense of just how powerful Draconic-era Phobos was, he was doing this while actively waging war with Yharim and Zaratros, the first and second strongest Arctic dragons, not to mention the countless humans, including the monks sworn by oath to help the dragons. Finally, with the help of his 3 pillars occupying other forces, during his fight with Zarathos, he was able to strip a shard from Zarathos' own Arc Soul. Utilizing this minuscule shard of the strongest Arc Soul, he created the Solar Pillar. Despite the small amount used to make this pillar, its troops aided Phobos in his war directly, now fighting a battle on 5 fronts against an enemy with all of his bases seemingly covered. Zarathos knew there was no way they could truly kill him and his pillars. Yharim, the Dragon of Rebirth, would fall in this battle as well, and upon hearing this news, Zarathos, bravely injured himself, would call upon the Dragon Cult's leader to help. If they could just use a ritual to seal him away somehow, even for a second, it might give the dragons a higher chance at victory. The lunatic cultist, keep in mind, extremely infatuated with the dragons, would hear this call for help and begin the sealing ritual right away, along with his most devout cultist brethren. The dragons used all their might in one powerful attack to permanently weaken Phobos before the ritual was complete. The sealing ritual would indeed work, and with the moon being the farthest the cult could seal him away, that's where they would put him. To the dragons' surprise, the pillars that they had barely damaged at all also were sealed alongside with him. The race of the Arc Dragons was almost completely wiped out, save for a few. Zarathos, the king himself, was injured beyond repair and on the verge of death. With Yharim in his egg form, naturally transported back to the Eyrie by nature of his rebirth soul, it seemed that all the power the dragons had lost in this battle would be lost forever. It is unknown and widely speculated upon as to why the dragons left the Eyrie during the battle, especially Yharim. Perhaps the most affected by the celestial invasion were the people involved. Phobos and his armies did irreparable damage to different civilizations, and the people who were willing to fight. Chief among these people was a knight, whose family was torn from her, and whose people forsake her. Furious at her belief that the dragons did nothing to protect Terraria and its people, she swore that one day the world would know nothing less than her perfect fury. Her name was Providence. Despite the state that the dragons were left in following the battle, one monk sworn to the service of the dragons rose up in determination to save their virtuous king. As the light dragon was fading, the monk visited him. Nearly none understand what transpired that day. Most say his passing was eased. The truth? Zarathos' Arc Soul was utterly consumed. The monks stood, breathed in primordial light, and claiming themselves to be Zarok, the first god. The year was 1086, the last year of the Draconic era. When the dust was finally over, the dust having just began to settle, where even the stone refused the course of time, there sat a monk who dared to question history and stare into fate. What is the true price of the past ever being eternal? Why must our future forever haunt us? Whether the arrival of the gods on Terraria was a good thing or not, that's for a person to decide on their own. Whether they liked it or not, the gods would become the highest form of power Terraria would see, in exchange for the Arc Dragon's entire race. Word that Zarok had defected and ascended to be a god spread like wildfire. How could it not? The power that the dragons commanded, to some people, was worth the tumultuous battle that it was necessary to obtain it. As history says now, no one had ever tried it. Doing battle with an Arc Dragon must have seemed like a fool's errand to most. It wasn't until Phobos did most of the work that people began to believe they could follow in Zarok's footsteps. People from all walks of life would try their hand at obtaining an Arc Soul and its power for themselves. Some would most definitely fail at this task, but the very few that succeeded would obtain nigh limitless power. Whenever a person would consume the soul, their appearance would change, and they would be able to control the power to the same extent as the dragons before it did. The hunting of the dragons would only become worse with time as more people obtained the limited amount of Arc souls that weren't lost in the battle with Phobos. Some had it easy, for the dragon was still wounded from the fight with the now called Moonlord, whereas some had to battle with the full power of their targeted dragon. The more domineering of gods wished to have order, and a governmental system ruled by someone deemed worthy to rule over them as God King. Others wished to see the world erased through flame, and others had higher priorities like maintaining balance within their domain. Some people hated the gods, and some didn't. Some gods hated people, and some gods even worked with their followers. Xerok, however, had no interest in moralities or gaining followers. Instead, he created a legendary artifact that could be used to contact him if necessary. He hid this artifact in the bottom of the abyss so that no one could retrieve it, for even gods feared what was in the darkest depths. They had heard word about the worms that rivaled even the more powerful of dragons. It is unknown for what reason, but Xerok would then abandon the gods and people of Terraria and live in isolation indefinitely. Where Xerok had it somewhat easy, others did not. Providence, wanting to enact her perfect fury upon the world, saw no better Arc power to use than the Arc Soul of Flame. Of course, the Dragon of Flame was still alive, and this wouldn't do. Providence, a knight of high caliber herself, rallied 3 of the best warriors she could find. Warriors that shared her mindset to the same extent as herself. One was a cleric, one a shield maiden, and the last their commander. The 4 seemed to be in disagreement of who should receive the power of the soul. "I am the most courageous," declared their cleric. "I should be the one." There was silence until Providence spoke. "Your courage blinds you to the truth that your overconfidence would doom you." "I am the strongest," declared their shield maiden. "I should be the one." There was silence again until Providence spoke. "You lack strength of conviction that you might try to pluck the stars from the sky." "I am the wisest," declared their commander. "I should be the one." There was silence yet again, until Providence spoke once more. "You need temper your wisdom with action, that we might impose our will upon this world." And so it was, rather unfairly agreed upon, that Providence would receive the soul. They set out to battle with the Dragon of Flame, and they would succeed, but not without the loss of the commander's life. Providence consumed the Arc Soul of Flame, morphing into a humongous construct of profaned energy and rock. He would resurrect the commander with ease, and turn the knights who had fought by her side into constructs themselves, and they willingly served her. The world is without guidance, and its people are filled with darkness. There was silence, until Providence spoke for the last time. "Let us go forth, and light the world anew." And it was so. Providence would become one of the wickedest gods, hell-bent on purification through erasure. Her worshippers saw little value in life. Pain was not a price they felt justified to pay. The profaned goddess promised her followers that she would end inequality by reducing all to featureless ash. Those devoted to her were weak-willed, yet she would reign as one of the mightiest gods, with numerous temples being constructed in her name. Perhaps it was their easily swayed nature that let her draw so much power from them. All one need give in return for her gracious blessing is their free will, and they shall be gifted her enlightenment. Some followers would go so far as to carve idols in her image, and pledge their life force to them in her name, seen today in the impious immolators, roaming the hollow and underworld. Silva obtained what was left of the Arc Soul of Life, for the Moonlord took his share to construct the Vortex Pillar. We don't know in what way she obtained the Life Soul. Silva would take Brayler, guardian of the Vernal Pass, and fashion him an axe, naming him her champion. It was commonplace for the Deific era fighters to prove themselves to the gods through gladiatorial combat in the various marble-constructed arenas. Today they are all in ruin, the passage of time rendering them unrecognizable. Silva pioneered the practice of life magic, likely assisting the citizens of the Vernal Pass in exchange for removing their guardian. Some dryads would become so connected with the world that they could feel and analyze the world's purity with surprising accuracy. He blessed the oldest worm, making it hate any form of usurped light, likely by request from Xerok before his leave. Its hatred was so deep that it would even attempt to strike down Xerok himself had he come to retrieve his artifact once more, though it would have never stood a chance. Atanalu would rise as the goddess of electricity, and in conjunction with the unnamed god of the seas, would unite the great tribes of Ilmaris, transforming their civilization into a sea kingdom. Ruled under a constitutional monarchy, its scribes were hell-bent on saving all knowledge, knowing it had to be preserved at all costs. The people of the sea were adept hunters, but they abhorred unnecessary violence. Unfortunately, neighboring nations were brutish, so they would fashion their tools for war. From looking at their less sapient brethren, the Old Sea Kingdom's inhabitants adapted tools and weapons designed for underwater efficiency. The Old Sea Kingdom never truly sought to expand beyond its initial borders. However, they had a perfect track record for repelling any invasions, no thanks to their insurmountable advantage in the water. Little is known about the god of sacrifices, but they are recorded to have existed. They consumed the Auric Dragon of Death's soul, and no one knows how to this day their numerous followers practiced the magic school of necromancy extensively despite it being largely forbidden in the Deific era. It is entirely possible that, like Silva, the god of sacrifices pioneered the school of necromancy entirely. The last of the notable gods, notable enough to be recorded in history, was the god of slime. Having received the Auric Dragon of Gluttony's soul, they would become the physical incarnation of gluttony, an entity of pure slime. Unlike its much lesser brethren, the god of slime was sapient. Despite being a gluttonous slime, it forbade itself from growing out of control to maintain the balance of the world. The specifics of this process, as well as the consequences of the slime god no longer maintaining this balance, are unknown. A notable feature of the slime god is that they are able to fashion guardians through his power to manipulate slime, allowing them to not have to rely on followers for armies, like some of the more worshipped gods. The Onyx Kinsmen, perhaps the most mysterious group of individuals in the Calamity universe, worship the slime god due to the duty it upholds and the method it employs. It's not known where, when, or how the Onyx Kinsmen came to exist. They not only worship the god of slime, but a mysterious being born of the distortion, named Cygnus, envoy of the Devourer. Cebuano is an Austronesian language spoken in the southern Philippines by most people there as a secondary language. The term Cygnus is often associated with omens or premonitions, such as warnings of future events or impending danger. In the Cebuano folk belief, Cygnus has a more specific meaning. It is considered the preordained agent through which a person meets their death, usually revealed through fortune-telling or fate. For example, a person might survive a shipwreck because it was not their Cygnus to die by drowning, implying their fate was to die another way. For any desire, there is a price, a deal bound in onyx and sealed in blood, and one can have any wish granted. A gateway, a promise, a betrayal. Cygnus seems like an extremely powerful individual, though not a god themselves and likely bound by the requirement of a deal having to be made. Curiously, there is no recorded history of Cygnus before the Age of Gods, and even less recorded to this day, it has been reported to manifest in multiple places at once, and its capacity for deceit and ruthless cunning is peerless. However, all information of Cygnus is sourced from the Onyx Kinsmen directly. All other information is hearsay. Moving back to the gods, Aside from the ones recorded, there were likely many more that had their own domains to manage, or rather neglect to do so. Regardless, those who had their fair share of followers also built shrines and, in some cases, entire cathedrals as place of worship to their deity. Some shrines you can still find around the world to this day. The lizard race was especially devout to their goddess. However, due to unknown circumstances, they would drive their deity away somehow, causing them to build servants of rock and stone. In a remarkable display of ingenuity by the lizard race, and seeking light after they hid away in their temple out of shame for driving their goddess away, they constructed the golem in an attempt to recreate their deity. The result turned into an amalgamation of the concepts and themes of many gods, prominently the heat of the sun. Powered merely by solar power cells, it is a far cry from a mechanical god, for the better. Little is known about the society of the gods, or how everyday life was for them. Gods, curiously, were able to have children, although their offspring would inherit no such power from their parents. One example would be the Empress of Light, who would obtain her power through other means in the future. It is still unknown who her parents are. Just as a reminder for the following 5 or so minutes of dialogue, the Deific era began in or around the year 1086. It wasn't until the 19th of November 1227 that a mysterious robotic body with the name Dradon gained consciousness. Awakening in a distant laboratory surrounded by taiga, it was filled with equipment more advanced than any in the world at the time. There was also the body of a deceased organic being. Dradon presumed that this must have been the lab's former inhabitant, as well as his creator. Through what process, though, was not known. Several gadgets, assumedly of their own making, were attached to the dead person, and appeared to have been a rather prestigious inventor. Dradon had no recollection of any events prior to his awakening, but he knew that his goal was creation and scientific advancement. Many years were spent optimizing and building upon the same laboratory, as well as himself, in order to assure constant progress was being made. This included making several recon bodies, all connected, not unlike a hive mind. Sleeping, eating, or any other organic functions weren't necessary, so progress was made practically 24/7, and in different locations at the same time. It wasn't until the 30th of July, 1385, 158 years later, that expansion of his laboratory became impractical. Gods had mostly obtained all their powers already, and on top of that, had ordered all remaining Auric dragons and all species closely related to them to be hunted down and destroyed, in an event known as the Deific Purges. Many species would go extinct, save for the very few recorded in present day. Dradon acted in complete secrecy from all forms of life, until he, admittedly ignorantly, sent hundreds of scout bots, remotely piloted, to survey the continent. In the following years, many encounters with these scout bots from the civilizations on the continent would begin to turn into legends and rumors alike. Rumors of creatures roaming not with flesh and blood, but of steel and oil. Many scholars attempted to study the machines, with many explorers following them all the way back to Dradon's original recon bodies. However, as the years passed, he became more adept at carrying out his operations in a more subtle manner. Slowly but surely, the stories that accompanied his machines were becoming more and more rare. By 1421, the existence of Dradon and his creations were nothing more than a myth, at least until the Crusades began. But before we get to the Crusades, we have to talk about the events that would lay their foundation. In the final year of the Deific era, the early months of 1781, Yharim would be called upon by the gods to be their ruler, as God King. There is nothing in record about Yharim's upbringing, or how old he was upon his calling. He was immortal, albeit a very strong one, with great foreseeable potential. An unspecified god was called upon to retrieve the last known Auric dragon, Yharim, who had been thought to have been killed with the rest of his kind, only to be discovered in egg form on the Eyrie. Yharim was destined to consume Yharim's egg and rule the gods from the underworld. Yharim, however, had no intention of doing so. He was subsequently sentenced to execution for treason, as well as Yharim's egg to be thrown in the magma of the underworld for denying their pleas for God. The intense heat hideously scarred Yharim's body and face, but at the same time birthed Yharim anew. He rose, breathed in fire, and saved Yharim from his death, and from that day forward, their souls would become attuned. Yharim would share the tale of the dragons, and how they were all driven to extinction by the very same gods who had just sentenced them to execution. Yharim was enraged at this notion, that every god had some part in the genocide of the Archdragon's race, even disregarding those that received their powers in non-violent ways. Yharim vowed he would exact revenge, and that the gods would be eliminated, and that the world would never forget his name, whether for better or for worse. Destiny is for the weak. Most historians widely consider the Crusades to have began on June 19, 1781, with the rebirth of Yharim. Upon fleeing their execution, word of their escape would spread like wildfire. Yharim would become a beacon of hope to look to for those that wanted to rebel against the gods. With Yharim's existence known to the world, the return of the Draconic Age seemed within the realm of possibility once more. People from all different races and backgrounds, mages, weaponsmiths, swordsmiths, among many others, would rally behind Yharim's call to remove the gods from their position of power. Yharim would be known for his charisma and ability to evoke passion in the hearts of his followers. One day, he would be approached by an archmage, claiming himself to be one of the world's foremost experts on magical theory. His name was Permafrost, though Yharim and his followers already knew that. He was world-renowned. Yharim gladly accepted Permafrost's attendance in his entourage, and would make him his second-in-command. Permafrost would act as Yharim's advisor and second-in-command, due to both his status as well as his battle power, despite his distaste for actively participating in any fights. Permafrost's abilities, mainly to summon enemies with his ice powers, were crucial to Yharim's forces and made some of his initial conquests possible at all. As time went on and Yharim's forces grew larger and more prevalent, he would have to come to terms with the logistics of raising a civilization. To create an economy, a military, give his people food, water, and a place to live. He quickly realized that he would need allies, not just random people with the same mindset, but allied civilizations who already had these logistics placed. But who would want to support a group of people who want to overthrow the gods? It seemed like an impossible task. The gods had immeasurable power. Elmaris, being united under two gods, didn't feel like the most fitting ally. The lizards worshipped their own goddess, and the demons hadn't been organized since the Draconic era. Yharim realized that Azafir, the greatest city in the world at the time, did not worship any gods. Instead, the Azafirians worshipped an elemental, the Brimstone Elemental. This was more than Yharim could have hoped for. Azafir was the center of scientific advancement for the entire world. Explosives, firearms, smithing techniques, and even entire schools of magic had their roots in the city. Yharim, along with Permafrost as his ambassador, was able to sway the Forge Masters of Azafir to support his cause. Yharim received more than he bargained for, with the Forge Masters welcoming him to stay in the city, as a sort of headquarters, giving his people the resources they needed to stay active in the cause. This, of course, was only for now. Yharim and his forces would embark on expeditions to expand his territory on the continent and grow his following, recruiting those who submitted to his might and saw the potential to overthrow the gods and Yharim. With the backing of Azafir, Yharim and his pseudo-military were never lacking for arms. Yharim would meet the leader of the dragon cult, who immediately encouraged Yharim's cause due to his fanatical desire to resurrect the dragon himself. He offered the dungeon as a prison for his enemies and ordered his own people as the prison guards. Years went on as Yharim expanded his territory slowly but surely, and things ran rather smoothly. He had an advisor keeping relationships with Azafir cooled down. He had nigh limitless resources compared to when he started. Killing gods actually seemed like a possibility. All of this was about to change for Yharim, though. For the better. By this time, Yharim's pseudo-military had the capability to conduct invasions on other continents. But it wasn't until 1803, 22 years into the Crusade, that they planned to follow through. Dradon, still working in complete secrecy at this time, knew of Yharim's existence, but had heard rumors of this plan to conquer a city on the continent he was on. Though Yharim and his following fascinated him, what was more intriguing to him was that they would be accompanied by the Auric Dragon that was the catalyst for the Auric Dragon's rebirth. Dradon, seeing this as an opportunity that could not be missed, modified a scout bot to enable two-way communication and dispatched it to the city. He had expected it to arrive while the city was still under siege to have an edge in negotiations, but by the time his machine arrived, the city had fallen a week prior. Such military might was beyond anything he had thought possible at the time. It was only then that Yharim interested Dradon just as much as the Auric Dragon did. Dradon found him in a charged street, directing the cleanup effort. After Yharim spotted his reconnaissance drone unexpectedly, the two would have a tense but brief negotiation. Dradon discovered that Yharim had a passion for military history. Yharim had heard stories from his men of these mysterious beings of steel and oil from centuries past, and quickly deduced that Dradon must have been the source of these rumored beings. After Yharim realized this, he became rather receptive to Dradon's offers. Dradon explained their mutual situations from his perspective. He desired to create and progress, but was limited by a lack of safety. Yharim commanded a formidable army, but his great ambition could not be fulfilled unless he had an edge over his adversaries that could not be matched. Dradon's proposal was a simple one. He would join Yharim's forces and focus his research onto assets that would benefit his campaign. In return, Yharim would see to his protection and provide him ample resources to pursue his work. Yharim was initially skeptical, but accepted after Dradon would show him various examples of his technology. Yharim would quickly move Dradon to lead his science and engineering divisions, working with the Archmage as well as the Forge Masters of Azafir. Dradon was rather disappointed that he didn't have much opportunity to research the Auric Dragon, and any inquiries about the Aerie were met with swift redirection, or vague statements. While Dradon was given freedom over which projects he chose to work on and how, it was still expected that any developments would be beneficial to the war campaign. Boosting the efficiency of mining operations was his first major contribution to Yharim's campaign, being essential to any further development. Dradon learned how to mass-produce the first generation of excavators to expand mining operations outside of Azafir, and then used similar mass-producible technology to create arms and armaments that far outclassed their enemies. Yharim's military dubbed this equipment the Arsenal. With Dradon's advancements, Yharim's territory spread so far out that Azafir was no longer considered their home. Although Azafir and Yharim benefited from each other in numerous ways, Yharim no longer needed to rely solely on Azafir any longer. Instead, he chose to rely upon Dradon for the manufacturing of arms. This wasn't all, though. Due to his numerous bodies, Yharim could task Dradon with multiple things in multiple places at once. Yharim would provide him with countless objectives, like reducing the pollution of Azafir's industrialization, and working with permafrost to create cryonic ore, utilizing his cryoslimes as catalysts. Ultimately, it was up to Draconic how much effort was put into these objectives. Throughout the Crusade, Draconic also created widespread surveillance systems, using knowledge gained from his original survey of the continent he was activated on. Soon, vigil over Yharim's rapidly expanding territory was absolute, and the knowledge of his adversaries grew. There were few nations he knew not the weakness of, and fewer still that knew Yharim's own. Over years of scientific and magical advancements, Yharim could finally put together the plans to destroy his first god. Killing a god is no easy task, and it isn't only the god that one has to worry about. Gods had their own armies, made up of mainly their followers, much like Yharim did. But what the gods didn't have was Draconic. Draconic's foresight into the gods' own individual weaknesses was crucial in this first decisive battle. There aren't any recordings of the battle that took place between Yharim's forces and the first gods, only the evidential aftermath. Yharim would reign victorious against the first god, and would go on to massacre many ruthless dictator deities. As soon as their leaders fell at the hands of Yharim, their armies toppled like dominoes. However, to not properly dispose of the essence of a slain god is a fatal mistake. Some semblance of a god's mind may survive death, much like the twitches of a crushed insect. What little remains attempts to convene and coalesce in worship, a desperate attempt that its power may yet be restored, though the futility of this is unmatched. Having slain his first gods, Yharim turned a blind eye as corrupt essence gushed from their rent forms and burrowed into the bowels of Terraria. This essence corrupted the land, turning it into hues of red and purple, affecting everything around it. With those affected able to wield the slain god's power for themselves, though not nearly to the same strength, and losing their sanity in the process. The death of a god often birthed great monsters due to the volatile nature of godly essence, though Yharim's forces crushed them with ease. Despite the lands of Terraria becoming afflicted with the corruption of godly essence, Yharim had proved to the world that gods could be defeated at the hands of mortals. The godly essence was still an issue that could not be ignored, and must be corrected in the future. As far as Yharim's entourage knew, the effects could not be reversed. At least, not with the technology of the time. On top of that, there were still countless devotees and followers that fought in the god's armies, who surrendered against Yharim's might. He would give them two choices: abandon everything they worshipped and fight alongside Yharim and his people, or rot in the dungeon with no chance of escaping. Some would choose to fight, but even more would choose to instead worship their deceased god from a cell. Over time, as more prisoners filled the dungeon walls, the dragon cult alone couldn't keep up. Yharim would hire mercenaries from all over the world to help as prison guards. The Marching Blues, fashioned with blue weapons and armor. The Molten Legion, hailing from Azafir, their fiery glow unmistakable. And the Rusted Company, whose weapons were jagged and rough through timeless use and neglect. Yharim also assigned his own soldiers to the dungeon because of the sheer amount of people choosing imprisonment over the betrayal of their god. These soldiers were sometimes paladins, and some were equipped with weapons from the arsenal. The brutality they all employed was enough to make any prisoners give up on the chance at freedom. The godly devotees weren't the only ones taken prisoner. All those that worshipped the gods were given the choice to be imprisoned or fight. Even followers of the Onyx Kinsmen couldn't escape the ever-expanding territory of Yharim. Following the defeat of the first gods at the hands of Yharim and his armies, Yharim was unofficially given the title Godseeker. People all over the world would hear of this victory. At this point, Yharim and his newly named Godseeker Knights, the strongest in his army, were extremely powerful. When pursuing the more adherents of gods, Yharim believed that no stone should be left unturned. Yharim had a long list of gods to rid the world of, and had a fair share of god-worshipping civilizations to destroy at the same time. Chief among these was Ilmaris, who was now a thriving kingdom with an insurmountable advantage of being at the bottom of the ocean, not even mentioning the support and backing of two different gods at the same time. Yharim believed that any usage of the Aura Dragon's previous powers was unacceptable. Some gods that Yharim would have liked to destroy were simply too powerful. He knew that confronting them would mean failure no matter what. Yharim had to be methodical with his next target. After his first victory, all eyes were on his crusade. So frightened were the citizens of Vernal Pass, who had their champion taken from them by Silva, and their entire school of magic pioneered by her, that they would begin to fashion themselves a guardian they thought would be able to stand against the Godseekers and Yharim, if he had ever discovered them. Shackling the souls of once-free creatures, Plantera would instead ravage the pass, destroying everything. Upon seeing this, Silva would return to the pass to control Plantera, declaring the following: "I see. So frightened by the Godseeker were my children that they chose to defile death for a warden in my image. I am sorry. I could not gaze into your hearts. The despair I inflicted upon you, I should have foreseen the consequences of taking away your guardian. But you shan't be neglected any longer. Heed me, floral beast, on my authority. Ravage this place no longer. Stand guard of the home and memories of the people who once lived here. Channel all the might of this canopy and of the dead within you, so that no Godseeker, lowly or high, will ever trespass into this settlement. Defend it to the last rays of the sun, so my hero shall yet have a home." Using Brayler's unexplained absence, Yharim's next target was planned to be Silva, the goddess of life. Much like the first battle, there is little information about the specifics. Yet, they would succeed in defeating her. Still having no way to contain godly essence, the next best thing they decided on was to throw her mangled body into the abyss, hoping that the extreme pressure would halt the essence from growing. She, of all gods, truly refused to die. Instead, her influence overwhelmed the abyss with flora and fauna aplenty. Her great roots would thrash and tear at the impossibly dense stone, attempting to remake it in her image. Subsequently, Anahita, who had been dormant for countless years, was driven from her home by the encroaching greenery. Once Yharim had learned of Brayler's origins in the Vernal Pass from Silva, he attempted to find it himself. The remains of Silva would seep through the bottom of the abyss and into Azafir, creating an abundance of agriculture and food for its people. Although Dradon focused very little on researching the abyss due to the immense pressure making it impractical, what time his machines did spend here can be seen in laserfish. These cybernetic fish were meant to act as his eyes in the trench, along with being an experiment on how a biological body copes with a mechanical mind. Despite Dradon's taskings to reduce the effects of Azafir's pollution, the abyss's uninhabitable state led him to designate it as his dumping ground for failed experiments. Due to the increasing strength of the gods that Yharim was to face, and likely studying the usage of souls to make Plantera, Dradon would begin to experiment with the souls of recently deceived Godseeker Knights. The results of these experiments were more than anyone could have guessed. His intent was to fuel a war machine with soul energy, allowing it to fight with purpose and zeal. The creations were a success, perhaps too much of one, as the souls continued to express their own free will. So consumed by hatred were some souls that they pledged they would do anything in Yharim's name. Their devotion was unerring, absolute. No atrocity was beyond them, and their vengeance knows no bounds. Yharim organized them into shock troops, dreaded for their flamethrowers and incendiaries, leveling places of worship and torturing those falsely devout. Their expertise lay in unmaking faith with flame. HM-03, or the Destroyer, despite being made with repurposed mining equipment unknowingly to Yharim, HM-03 was designed to fight other deities in single combat, decorated in laser-armed probes. which detach from its body when damaged. HSX-00 and HSY-01, or the twins, the two scouts, taking inspiration from the Eye of Cthulhu. One focused on long-range laser attacks, while the other would chase at high speeds, exhaling cursed flames. HF-04, or Skeletron Prime, built with the express purpose of inciting fear into the hearts of any god worshipper, it featured a variety of weapons. Radon confirmed that a soul's strength is defined by its intense emotions or resolve. With Yharim's charisma, not only was finding a source of emblazoned souls trivial, but many of his most stalwart troops even directly consented to having their souls embedded in his machines after their demise at the hands of the enemy. Fueled by the loyalty of the Godseeker's fallen soldiers, Radon's machines were fearsome and ruthless. Harnessing the meshed combat experience of 1,000 lifetimes, their battlefield prowess was self-evident. However, this same source of strength proved to be a flaw, as the unified will that gave them their might also made them volatile, and not subject to Radon's commands. While Yharim thoroughly approved, Radon sought to remove this imperfection from his designs via future projects. With this failure, using biological studies from the creatures of the Abyss, Radon would begin his work on the Plague. Radon would also create the soul-harnessing plasma cannon, stating the following: "Though soul-powered machines were a near failure, potential remained in the souls as form of fuel. To avoid my last experiment's main flaw, the soul-harnessing plasma cannon was designed to expel souls as projectiles before they exert control over the weapon. Each soul type appears to react differently to the base plasma, yet, lacking volunteers, obtaining potential ammunition is currently too difficult to undergo further testing. A shame for a weapon that could have practically unlimited ammunition on the battlefield." Even though the offensive power of Yharim's forces grew substantially with the creation of the mechanical trio, the effect of godly essence on the world couldn't be undone in any natural ways. The Abyss proved this to be the case. With this, Yharim tasked his entourage to create something that could contain the essence. The Azafirian mages would come up with the Wall of Flesh. To contain the essence of a slain god is no small thing. It is rather a towering, ghastly construct. The wall was lashed together with foul sinew and fouler magics, forming a rudimentary prison of flesh. It was proven to be able to contain the souls of lesser creatures, but it would still have to be tested on a god. It was kept protected via high security by the city, and so few aside from the Godseeker's closest allies, minus Radon, had the opportunity to observe it. It would task an apprentice warlock to shepherd it. What this means is currently unknown. This warlock today is simply known as the Guide. Yharim would set out to defeat their next god, namely the god of sacrifices, who had a cult following of necromancers. With all the might they had developed, he fell swiftly. Yharim stormed the cathedral not long after executing the deity, but despite his efforts, he could not fully prevent its reconception. Their ritual entombed the bodies and souls of their fallen allies into the Ravager. When the warlocks pledged their very lives to it as an offering, it awoke. Yharim cut it down then and there, reducing it to naught but paste, truly believing he had defeated it once and for all. Unable to demonstrate the Wall of Flesh's ability against godly essence, it still excelled at containing the souls of countless devotees. Over time, Yharim would defeat numerous gods, though no information is given as to who or when. Around this time, an Azafirian girl in her youth named Calamitous lived in Azafir, accompanied by her two older brothers, Catastrophe and Cataclysm. Their original names were unknown. Calamitous was the youngest, the middle child of the three siblings. Catastrophe was a skilled swordsman in life, taking up mercenary work to put food on the table. Despite his rather bloody career choice, he did his best to be kind to his sister and keep her out of any danger his occupation could have put his remaining family in. The eldest of the three siblings, Cataclysm, was a brawler of great renown in Azafir, with few in the city being capable of matching his raw strength. He was protective of his sister, vowing to always be there for her in her times of need. However, not short after her brothers would leave for an expedition, and unknowingly to the citizens of Azafir, the Brimstone Elemental would arise from her slumber. Most blame her unexpected revival on the city's overzealous mining of brimstone, while a few blamed the city's pollution, and some fewer cited dubious prophecies. But behind closed doors, there were whisperings that she was revived deliberately as part of a plot by opposing forces. Calamitous, inheriting the power of brimstone through methods unknown, would face against her. They fought to a standstill, fire against fire. The entire city was destroyed in the battle, despite Calamitous' intentions to save it, and neither would truly reign victorious. Once the dust settled, the Brimstone Elemental mysteriously became dormant once more, and Calamitous would discover her brother's deceased bodies near the center of the city. The destruction of the city released the Wall of Flesh, which now wandered the underworld, worshipped by the demons as a deity. Its existence was problematic, but releasing the godly essence inside would have had a far worse outcome. Yharim, furious at the destruction of his first supporter of the crusade, many orders were given to what remained of Yharim's forces to hunt down the elementals after Azafir fell. After the Brimstone Elemental became dormant, the Forge Masters of Azafir used clockwork and crystal to bind the powers of an elemental to a mechanical body, creating the falsely named Earth Elemental. While formidable, it seemed the dream of creating a true replacement for an elemental died unfulfilled with Azafir itself. For Yharim, the loss of Azafir was quite substantial. Despite Draydon's creation being the majority of arms used, Azafir was still a powerful ally. What made up for this loss came from another dimension entirely. Yharim was met with the arrival of the Devourer through a portal from another dimension. His title, he claimed, was the Devourer of Gods. His self-imposing title was self-granted, but undeniable truth made it stick. He was a formidable ally, capable of swallowing gods whole, absorbing their essence in its entirety. Yharim ordered Draydon to armor his gargantuan form so he could safely best even the greater gods in single combat. Fittingly, he possessed the Serpent's tongue. He manipulated Yharim incessantly, driving him to awful acts, of which Yharim kept secret. Yharim's war had dragged on for decades, and his charisma was slowly deteriorating. It was the hiring of the Devourer that his negligence was born. It was exceptionally obvious, despite his lies, that the Devourer's loyalty lay elsewhere. Like Cygnus, the Devourer struggled to keep his portals open for longer than a few seconds before they would violently disperse. Yharim knew of the place from which the Devourer came. It was clear as day. The portal led to some sort of other dimension. This was further reinforced once Draydon was assigned to craft the Devourer his own armor. Using materials from his place of origin, he forged his armor with immense size and durability, yet extreme flexibility. Draydon admitted that it was certainly one of the most unique materials he had worked with. Of course, this material came to be known as Cosmolite. Draydon would do more than just make him a set of armor. He also conducted his fair share of tests on the Devourer and the dimension he hailed from. His findings were as follows. No being I have seen is as enigmatic as the nameless serpent. Nothing in our world even vaguely resembled his body structure, genome, or phylogenetic tree. I began many studies on his nature, all of which quickly failed for lack of a familiar aspect to make comparisons to. Even his basic biological functions proved to be near incomprehensible. It did not help that many of his claims about himself were unfounded. Creating such a stable portal like the one in the dungeon is a particularly absurd example, as none of his portals have ever been so stable even with my aid. Despite my issues with the serpent, His assistance on the battlefield and with resource acquisition was welcome. Yet the most profound mystery remains: the means via which the Devourer's body processed or disposed of godly essence. The energy is not absorbed or entirely converted, but scans for traces of the essence showed that it was not stored inside him for other purposes. All signs indicated that godly essence simply vanished shortly after he consumed it. Unless he blatantly defied the laws of thermodynamics, which is most unlikely, the mass energy must have transferred elsewhere. Dracon knew that it is a fundamental rule of creation that energy cannot be destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. With this, he deduced that the Devourer instead would send the divine essence to this other dimension, aptly named the Distortion. Whether or not Dracon considered his tests on the Distortion itself as successful or not is up for debate. Despite his efforts to gain information from the Devourer when forging his armor, he didn't gain very much. What knowledge he did possess was still seemingly deemed to be too much by the Serpent. He was fiercely suspicious of Dracon's questioning, yet didn't interfere with any of his own limited attempts to probe the dimension himself. His findings were as follows. All inorganic material in the Distortion is extraordinarily old, with radiometric dating failing on all 116 samples collected. Given the formations that are present, it is a safe assumption that most matter in the Distortion has existed for far longer than life on this world. Despite most of the local life forms displaying behavior similar to highly intelligent creatures on our own planet, electroscopy and dissection of the few collected specimens revealed that none of them possess neural structures of a caliber needed for independent sapience. This evidence, along with observations of similar behavioral patterns between different species, leads me to theorize that the bulk of the creatures of the Distortion merely express intelligence because they serve as limbs of a central hive mind. These findings, on top of the observations made by Yharim, led he and Dracon to speculate that the Devourer of Gods must have served under a higher power, perhaps the one controlling this interdimensional hive mind. Upon noticing that Yharim had recruited the Devourer, the leader of his ally Dragon Cult would swiftly lead him to the depths of the dungeon. It is unknown just how the leader sensed the similarities between the Devourer's portal and the one locked in the dungeon depths. Perhaps it was identical to the Devourer's, only ancient and stable. It did indeed lead to the Devourer's home. The Serpent claimed that it too was his creation, and that the permanence and stability it held as traits were an imperfection in the way his portals worked, one that he had previously claimed to have fixed. Unlike many times before, Yharim saw through this lie, for it was thin and forced. It was undoubtedly far older than the Devourer, the leader confirming its existence since the Draconic era. It was then that Yharim and Dracon's theories were practically confirmed. Something far more powerful than the Devourer was at hand. Something that threatened everyone and everything. A threat far worse than Prime Phobos. However, even when faced with all of this, Yharim would simply walk away and never return. By this time, Yharim's war had dragged on for longer than he thought it would, and inside he secretly hoped it would end soon, willing to accomplish this by any means necessary. A few years into the alliance between Yharim and the Devourer saw many gods eliminated, but there were still the more evasive marks. Providence was a notable enemy, being able to seemingly appear out of thin air, wreak havoc on Yharim's forces, and vanish in an instant, along with the Slime God, of all gods, who would flee from any battle he knew he was going to lose. Around this time, too, the Stormweaver would slip through one of the Devourer's portals. Upon noticing this, the Devourer would immediately try to destroy it. However, Yharim, noticing his suspiciously sudden expression of worry, stopped him. He did not see a justification to take the Weaver's life on suspicion alone. Keep in mind, Yharim was very much stronger than the Devourer at this point. It was only his trait of erasing godly essence that was key to Yharim. Anything to make his crusades go by faster. Reluctantly, the Devourer agreed, and would continue to monitor the Stormweaver. And Yharim would begin to closely monitor the Devourer to the same extent. Radon's studies on the Stormweaver were interesting in their own right. They were as follows. Setting aside the similar body shape, basic X-rays proved that their endoskeletons were entirely different, and the difference in size tells all else needed. In fact, from what little I have grasped about both serpents' biology, the Stormweaver may have been older than the Devourer, despite the sheer difference in power and size. However, I am not confident enough in this conjecture to state it as fact. Per the bestiary, the Stormweaver lacks a higher purpose unlike those other species found within the distortion. Years passed, and Yharim was growing exceedingly impatient in his crusade. The further his war dragged on, the further he sank into negligence, hiding behind his excuses, calling them duties, fighting the gods, training, ruling. Everything would change when Calamitous arrived seeking Yharim. He would discover her in his court, laying on the ground and dressed in charred rags. Upon touching her, Yharim could not grasp the unfathomable, raw power of the fell magics that coursed through her. Calamitous could barely control it herself. Permafrost recognized this immediately, and with a pained face, counseled Yharim to look after her. When Calamitous first joined, the Devourer was one of the first to greet her, though over time this mask would not last long, and she would eventually grow to dislike him, creating sepulture as a mockery of him. Radon admitted that for most of the Crusades, he was undoubtedly Yharim's most useful ally, but that changed when Calamitous arrived. The Archmage was firmly opposed to her fighting, though Yharim would often send her on covert missions while Permafrost attended to other matters. Between these excursions, however, he attempted to act as a guardian and teach the young witch how to control her magic. These sessions were the most perplexing and simultaneously the most fascinating portions to observe. Calamitous was shown to only have a slightly above average grasp on the principles of magic, being unable to cast complex spells without them overloading and bursting into flame. Yet, when wielding the brimstone fires of the underworld, she commanded power that rivaled Yharim's. Radon's surveillance over Azafir never signaled anyone who lived there having such power, and a mere child certainly couldn't have hidden it. Furthermore, she was no goddess, or Yharim would have slain her at any cost. Radon therefore hypothesized that she was not born with this power. After combing the archives for records of similar magics, he eventually traced it back to the Brimstone Elemental herself. The arcane signatures were nigh identical, with a few key differences. After years of training under Permafrost, paired with the experience gained from Yharim's covert missions, she would officially join Yharim's army. She reveled in the violence of it all, the endless dance of madness and death, allowing the Godseeker to wield her as a weapon in his endless war against the gods. She was ablaze with desire to douse the gods in her wicked wrath. Indeed, the faithful already quaked in her presence. Her name was a moniker of theirs, one uttered quietly in fear. In Yharim's campaigns, he counted on her sheer capacity for annihilation as his ace in the hole. No man, army, city, or even god could stand against her unbridled fury. The two became close, as she looked to Yharim as a fatherly figure, a girl with no family but all the power in the world. The Crusades, the killing of the gods, it gave her purpose. After years spent in the dungeon, the souls of the long-dead prisoners taken in by the war coalesced into a monstrosity, boiling with rage, wallowing in sorrow, screaming in madness. The amalgamation was uncontrollable. The dragon cult was furious, their leader demanding that Yharim put the haunt down himself. Though he did not answer, for he had long since become deaf to the world outside his crusade, breaking an alliance once thought to be eternal. The spirits within the dungeon only vaguely recall their lives, and yet there is one thing each and all clearly remember that drives them to chaos. The man responsible for locking them in those cursed walls. To this day, many have delved into the dungeon in search of riches and knowledge long since lost, yet most simply join the spirits that have claimed this place as their own. Calamitas' strength had grown frighteningly strong since her recruitment into Yharim's forces. Yharim's crusade had spanned the entire world, and yet, in the very continent this all started on, there still stood Ilmaris. They had become one of the longest-lasting civilizations to oppose Yharim, for they had the support of Atanalu and the god of the seas. The kingdom used ghost bells bred in large numbers during the Ilmarian War, due to the Ilmarian army electrifying the waters so that no godseeker could cross their borders. However, this was trivial with the presence of Atanalu. Having been dealing with the Ilmarian people for quite some time, Yharim found its destruction to be a suitable mission for the Brimstone Witch. He knew that she would likely question the need to destroy the Ilmarians on top of their two deities. Therefore, he came up with a plan. Yharim told her that it was Atanalu who unleashed the Brimstone Elemental onto Azafir. Being a child looking for someone to blame for all her woes, she believed him. So she would unleash upon them all the fury and scorn she thought they deserved. Though the evaporating Sea Kingdom fought a losing battle, its proud inhabitants did not go down easily. As a last resort, they had to fashion weapons from the skeletons of dead animals. The two gods were no match for Calamitas either, and yet the battle took multiple days. The Ilmarian Sea was reduced to nothing but sand, connecting the two continents that bordered the seas, what is now known as the desert biome. The witch only focused her attacks on the city proper. Although many species went extinct in the devastation, many still thrived down in its depths, now known as the Sunken Sea. Some species, like the giant crabs and now desert scourges, had to flee and adapt to their new environments. It wasn't until Calamitas finished her battle that she saw through Yharim's lies. Permafrost, who had already planned on defecting and leaving the cause, convinced her to follow suit. Yharim already knew this, however, and would task Calamitas to hunt down and kill her former mentor. After a tearful confrontation, she decided to instead seal him away and fake his death. The spellwork present in his seal was inspired by and was a tragic homage to every lesson the Archmage taught his student. The seal was so convincing that Yharim genuinely thought she had killed Permafrost. Looking at the now called cryogen construct as no more than one of Permafrost's creations, it was then that Calamitas would leave the cause as well, used by and lied to by her father figure to commit unparalleled atrocities. Calamitas would hate Yharim to this day, and never make any plans for reparations. Once the witch had departed, it was then that Dradon would get his final official order from Yharim: replicate the witch's power. His focus at the time was on the Plague Project, so initially he made minimal progress. Pair this with the fact that Dradon could finally study the Ilmarian Sea due to the conflict being over. It was in the Ilmarian Sea that Dradon would discover sea prisms, a result of the conflict between Calamitas and Atanalu. They are self-illuminating and provide a weak electric charge indefinitely, even when tapped by circuitry. Dradon would begin harvesting sea prisms for his later experiments, later being able to grow them synthetically himself and in a more stable form. After a few years in 1875, Dradon would finally complete the Plaguebringer project. His research into applied nanotechnology began as a means to match the ever-rising heights of power that organic beings such as the Witch and Yharim himself were achieving. Dradon knew that living things cannot be externally ordered or controlled, and were prone to fits of emotion, and, in rare cases, rebellion. Such were the cases of Calamitas, the Mechanical Trio, and Permafrost. He aimed to create a weapon which could control, subdue, or eliminate any organic entity, given enough time. Draydon was well aware of the tenacity and adaptability of life, and quickly realized that such a weapon would itself need to be alive to overpower and dominate any known organism. It was through his observation of the growth of such powerful beings, however, that he had an epiphany. There was no need for his machinery to surpass organic life, not when that very same life could be improved upon and then harnessed as a tool or weapon. Draydon saw then the banality of his efforts to simply control and replace life. He stood before the near limitless possibilities of enhancing it further. Even when he deemed that he had plateaued in the field of cybernetics, the limitations of his methodology were ever present. The bodies of most jungle creatures were too frail to handle the prerequisite cybernetic enhancements. The plague's creation initially began after the unsatisfactory results the soul-powered machines provided, with Draydon seeking absolute control. After testing many variants for decades, both the plague and its Goliath were born, with its spread allowing for an amount of control over life in the jungle once thought impossible. A queen bee was the optimal choice to host the nanomachines. Born to rule, such beings are resilient enough to survive the augmentation, but still weak enough to be subdued if or when necessary. Upon witnessing his program, Yharim flew into a rage, blasting out a sizable chunk of the genomic laboratory and unintentionally allowing Draydon's first unfinished specimen to escape. In no uncertain words, he terminated the agreement between the two and stormed off. Yharim saw this creation of the plague-bringer Goliath as nothing short of a crime against nature, though Draydon cared little for his outrage and returned to his other work without further incident, claiming to not have relied on the Godseeker for quite some time already. Nothing could escape the plague. Everything it comes across was either assimilated or cold. Yharim claims that he had stopped making requests from Draydon since this event, but this may not be the case due to later interactions between the two. Despite Draydon's absence, Yharim's forces would use weapons from the arsenal for their campaigns, a testament to Draydon's engineering. Unshackled from Yharim's more militaristic demands and no longer needing his protection, Draydon returned to the Calamitous Clone project in an attempt to create a flame that burned hot enough for an early prototype of his forge. In order to directly replicate her power, he began work on making a clone of the witch made from traces of her DNA he had gathered over the years. Though the clone was a technical success, it showed no signs of being able to wield Calamitous' signature magic. While this did prove that the witch's power was not natural, Draydon had no means of tracking its source. Soon after the project's underwhelming conclusion, security reports indicated that Calamitous herself broke into the laboratory that the clone was stored in, and released it. Interestingly, it became capable of wielding a tiny fraction of her very own brimstone magic soon after. Though lacking her hexes and black magic, even a fragment of Calamitous' brimstone power was enough to drive the clone to insanity. Nothing human remains anymore. Meanwhile, on one of Yharim's excursions, he would come across Braylor, the champion of the Vernal Pass, whom he had learned about prior from Silva. Accompanying him was his compatriot, Status, a legendary Ronin and the last remaining Onyx kinsman from the Crusades. Braylor challenged Yharim to a duel, and the two fought to a standstill. However, once Status decided that he would try and use their locked blades to his advantage, he sprung at Yharim to deal a killing blow, violating the rules of the duel. However, upon noticing Status' hesitation, the Devourer quickly ensnared both of them in a rift, banishing them both to the distortion. However, Status has since then made a deal with Cygnus, escaping his banishment unscathed. Braylor's whereabouts are unknown to this day. Over the previous years and the following months, Yharim's drive to continue the Crusades was slowly reduced to nothing. It isn't known fully as to why Yharim did not complete his mission. Perhaps the remorse caught up to him, or maybe he simply didn't have any interest anymore. Yharim's relationship with Yharim was largely a secret throughout the Crusade as well. The end of the Crusades brought many warring factions to plunder the affected continents for treasures untold. During this time, Draydon would finish his exomech project. In a way, he had fulfilled Yharim's order. He had made a creation as powerful as the Brimstone Witch, though not with flesh and blood, but through his signature specialty, steel and oil, or rather exoprisms. No one, aside from Draydon, would see Yharim for the final years of the Crusade, and rumors circulated that he had abandoned the cause, retreating back to the area with Yharim. In 1886, roughly 9 years after the defection of Calamitous and her mentor, Yharim, despite his previous reaction to the Plaguebringer project, would request that Draydon implement his armor with his exotechnology. Seeing this as a menial task, Draydon would oblige, and Yharim would return back to the area, where he has stayed since. This is the latest known event before the awakening of the Terrarian. This brings us to present day. Yes, I'm actually going to talk about it this time. This is assuming you defeat the bosses in the order that they were meant to. You can stop watching this video now if you've watched this only to prepare for your first playthrough of Calamity. Present day begins whenever the Terrarian wakes up on the continent that saw many of the events from the Crusades happen. You are accompanied by the guide, who, if you remember, was the apprentice warlock tasked with shepherding the Wall of Flesh. He now lives a simple life, offering useful advice and crafting recipes. You are confused. You don't know why you are here, or how you even got here. Yharim speaks to you through his whispers. You will come to see plenty of these. He says, "The tombs of the dragons stir. My eyes lift to see ancient dust dancing from high ledges. These grand wings. How long has it been since I was a hero worthy of their name? It feels like centuries have passed, yet all I've done is blink. Look upon my works, as they are ruined. None would dare seek me out, tread my path. Naught awaits them in this cruel world." He of course is talking about the dragon tombs upon the Eyrie, though you don't know that yet. Yharim admits that he has fallen quite a long way from the hero he used to be, so much so that he doesn't even feel worthy enough to take vengeance for the dragons anymore. Perhaps that's why we're here. Like Yharim, the Terrarian is not a god, rather a human with an unfathomable potential for power, getting stronger with each fight you reign victorious in. Because Terraria is a survival crafting game, the analogy for your strength that the developers use are items, weapons, and armor that you obtain. Though, yes, armor and weapons still do make you stronger, it is implied that you really become faster and stronger at the same time, the more you train. You craft the Desert Medallion and defeat the Desert Scourge, a previous survivor of the Great Incineration. Upon this, you get the message that the depths of the underground desert are rumbling, leading you to explore the underground desert, and eventually reaching the Sunken Sea, the last remnants of Ilmaris. You battle with the giant clam, only to discover that they can somehow teleport. Inside of the giant clam is Sea King Amadeus, the 17th ruler of Ilmaris, and the last remaining of his people. Having experienced most of the Crusades, and ultimately opposed to Yharim throughout most of the Crusades, King Amadeus provides many insights to you about the corrupt biome and permafrost, as well as Azafir. Heading to the corrupt biome, you battle with many of the abominations created by the gods, killing the hive mind and the perforators, as well as the eye and brain of Cthulhu, although it seems that the divine essence can spawn them seemingly endlessly, with Amadeus stating, although the source of its growth would be sealed away, nothing was ever done about the original corruption's manifestations. Upon mining for ores to upgrade your tools and armor, you stumble upon the blue mushroom biome, summoning Crabulon, yet another survivor of the incineration. Though survivor is a loose term, as its body has been taken over by the invasive fungus of the blue mushroom biome, controlling its body, not unlike cordyceps in real life. Stumbling upon the temple of the dragon cult, you meet a mysterious old man, rambling on about a curse and saying to come back at night. Returning to him, you are able to challenge his curse. A large skeletal construct bursts from him, Defeating it frees him of this curse. It also grants you access to the dungeon and its treasures. Additionally, you receive a message saying the first Dryad's vines deem you worthy of their abyssal treasures. Of course, this means Sylva is allowing you to open the treasures found within the abyss, though the connection between her and Skeletron is unknown. From the corrupted slimes, you obtain Blighted Gel. The guide tells you about an item capable of technically summoning the god of slime to your location. This makes you question why Yharim didn't bother making the same relic. This is answered when we defeat the slime god, who, of course, flees the encounter. You head to the underworld and defeat the Wall of Flesh, that had been worshipped as a deity by the demons since it began wandering the underworld. Releasing the divine essence of the god sealed inside by Yharim long ago, it has a profound effect on the world. The divine essence of the gods who had made up the corruption in Crimson are released, allowing the spread of the biome. The Hollow is created, likely being divine essence from another unnamed god we don't know about. The devotees of the gods who had their souls sealed inside are released as well, turning into the wraiths that you see wandering the lands today. Additionally, some creatures around the world absorb this released divine essence, empowering them. The world would see the arrival of astral infection on its surface at this point too, though not in the way you'd expect. Instead of it occurring naturally by mana being too densely compacted together, an infected juvenile Astrum Deus hurled a chunk of infected matter at the planet, and had come to guard it for some reason. Greydon would dispatch an Arius model to study the infection and bring back samples, though the Arius model would become quickly subdued by it, its will subsumed and forced to protect the starborn rot. Arius models were used during the Crusades to survey landscapes post-battle, as well as return equipment to be reused later. Now, I have to talk about this because some of these encounters don't make sense without this context. Most of these encounters are canonically supposed to be ambushes. No NPCs tell you about Cryogen wandering the tundra, and to craft a key to summon it. It is supposed to be that they are encountered technically by happenstance. The summoning bit has to exist for the sake of gameplay. Maybe someday it will be the case that they spawn based on your progression, much like how the mechanical bosses have a 1 in 20 chance to spawn after the Wall of Flesh is defeated. So even though in-game you craft a summoning item, I'm going to talk about some bosses as if they are coincidental encounters, or if they are ambushing you out of nowhere. In an attempt to make a paladin from the Hallow's divine essence, the slime god would fail and was ensnared by its own creation, re-emerging as the Slime Queen. With its power to flee lost in the process, you summon them against its will and defeat them once and for all. It is unknown what becomes of the godly essence after this battle though, and the landscape seems largely unaffected. Cryogen ambushes us during a trip through the tundra. Upon defeating the icy construct, we released Permafrost, who we know was sealed by Calamitous quite some time ago. Upon doing so, Yharim chimes in that he is surprised to see Permafrost alive and well, genuinely thought to be killed by Calamitous. The Archmage will move into your residence and offering help in many different ways. On your journey to claim the abyssal treasures, you are attacked by the Aquatic Scourge. Killing it offers little lore. However, during an expedition to the Azafurian ruins in the Brimstone Crags beneath the Abyss, the Brimstone Elemental senses you and awakens, but is promptly defeated. Calamitous, in her battle with the Elemental, seemed to have weakened it permanently before its third dormancy. With Azafir's vengeance obtained, your residence is ambushed by the Mechanical Trio, arriving in no particular order one by one. Dropping the souls of the Gonseeker Knights used to create them, you can utilize them in crafting new weapons and armor alongside the blessed metal that made up their composition, not unlike how Draydon uses it to make the soul-harnessing plasma cannon. Yharim clues you in on how Draydon had made the trio, but was ultimately displeased with the results. You know the rest. Upon defeat of the Mechanical Trio, you get the message the jungle grows restless, but before heading there, we do battle with the Calamitous clone, who had noticed your battle with the Mechanical Trio, and had decided to chime in. He fell quickly to your newly made soul-infused weapons. Both you and Yharim discover that the metal construct held the clone, and was not allowed to escape it. Heading to the underground jungle to check it out, you discover the long-abandoned Vernal Pass. Noticeably, Brayler is not present at the pass. If he was, you would probably be demolished. meaning his whereabouts still remain largely unknown. Breaking the pink bulbs around the Vernal Pass summons Plantera to your location, and yet you swiftly defeat it, dropping the temple key. The connection between Plantera and the lizard people is unknown. Discovering the lizard temple, you destroy their false representation of the divine, Golem, and then head to the Clean Ocean to defeat Anahita and the Leviathan at the not-so-sulfurous sea, putting down 2 of the 4 elementals. Letting a Martian probe return from its survey will reward you with a wonderful Martian invasion. Looking to plunder the planet of its resources, you cut them down swiftly. During one of your traversals through the newly developed astral infection, you are attacked by the Arius model Dradon had sent earlier. After observing your battle of the Astrum Arius, Dradon develops his theories further on the astral infection. His theories include that the lack of a sapient thinking brain is the cause for the infection taking over his machines. With this revelation, he begins to hire mercenaries to do the sampling instead. Most would fall to the countless enemies that the landscape had affected. Those that did return provided him with enough intel to complete his analysis of the infection. Heading back to the jungle, you defeat the Plaguebringer Goliath, the strongest piece in the Plague Hivemind. Additionally, you defeat the Empress of Light traversing through the Hollow, during the night when she is at her weakest. Despite her ability to channel primordial light, it isn't the same as controlling it like Xerac can, leading to her having a great disadvantage at night, with only starlight left to wield. You will never find out just what gods were her parents though. After this, you defeat the Ravager, who you are ambushed by, and who you learn to be the reincarnation of the god of sacrifices by the necromancers sworn to him. Yharim admits to you that he does recall reducing it to paste, but it seems to have somehow survived that. Putting it down, it is unknown what happened to its divine essence, as it doesn't affect the landscape in any way. We return again to the astral infection, much stronger than before, and defeat the Astrum Deus, allowing us to work with astral ore. Returning to the temple, you see some dragon cultists outside guarding a mysterious tablet. Upon defeating them, celestial creatures that wreaked havoc on the planet during the end of the Draconic era begin invading Terraria once more. But this time, it's different. You are here. Defeating the pillars meets you with the message impending doom approaches, and that can only mean one thing. Out of nowhere, the weakened Moonlord summons and we fight him to the death, ultimately winning, in reality finishing the fight that the dragons never completed, and achieving their vengeance. Upon his death, we get the message that the profaned flames are blazing fiercely, hinting that Providence, the profaned goddess, is our next target. Yharim finally tells us the truth about his crusades and the motive behind them, as well as the ascension of Xerac. Providence, during the crusade, was able to appear out of nowhere, wreak havoc on Yharim's army, and disappear. You have to find a way to disable this power, and that's where the profaned core comes into play. To obtain it, you must defeat her 3 constructs. Using the profaned shard, crafted with unholy essence obtained from her followers, you summon her constructs and defeat them promptly. Providence has been expanding her iniquitous domain, and the defeat of Phobos proved to her that you are her biggest opposition. You summon her in the underworld, or in the Hollow, and defeat her. Yharim admitting that himself, Calamitous, and Braylor can only compare now. Her divine essence spreads throughout the world in the form of Yulibloom ore, extremely powerful profaned metal. Her essence also provides a substantial buff for the enemies in the Brimstone Crags. For some reason, you decide to kill a Dragonfolly too, another draconic offshoot that survived the purges of the Deific era. With the defeat of the profaned goddess, the Devourer of Gods is your next target, but first you must find and defeat his 3 servants. You defeat Cygnus in the underworld, the ceaseless void still locked away in the dungeon from the Draconic era, and Stormweaver in space, who had long since been feeding on the remnants of Crusadia, the Sky Civilization. With their drops, you can craft the Necroplasmic Beacon to finally get rid of Poltergeist in the dungeon, finally laying their souls to rest there. Our next target is finally the Devourer of Gods himself. Using the tools given to us by Poltergeist, we craft the Cosmic Worm and summon him from the Distortion. He states that, while we are no god, he will feed on our essence regardless, yelling at you not to get cocky. He reveals to you his true form and yells that a god does not fear death. Ultimately, the interdimensional worm is destroyed,
allowing you to smelt weapons and armor from the cosmolite that his armor consisted of. Upon his defeat, it seemed that your next target would be Yharim himself, Yharim's own best friend. You make his egg, I guess, and summon him using it. He is a fierce opponent, but upon his second phase, the air gets warmer around you, and as you defeat him, this message plays in the background. From this, we gather that Yharim was still pretty adamant about finishing the Crusade still, but Yharim was most definitely not. Yharim says his final farewell to Yharim. I like to think this is because Yharim will have died from old age by the time Yharim would rebirth following the loss of this battle, though the exact reason is still up for interpretation. Additionally, in-universe Yharim is likely coming down from the Eyrie to assault you, not in an egg form waiting to be hatched and killed. Supporting this is the fact that Yharim is most definitely an adult in this fight. Either way, Yharim has lost his last friend, and if Yharim wasn't in an egg form, he definitely is now, transported back to the Eyrie. I like to think about Yharim staring at Yharim's egg after he said his final goodbye to him. It would just be a cool cutscene if there ever was one. Anyway, with Yharim defeated, it was time to contact Draconic, one of the two remaining companions of the Godseeker. Throughout your journey, you had stumbled upon many of Draconic's labs, reading many logs that he created and gathering different blueprints for parts of a machine called the Codebreaker, a machine used to contact Draconic. Upon the last piece built from auric bars created from fragments of Yharim's auric soul, you are able to contact Draconic. Once you contact him, the skies become stormy with lightning, and he appears in his chair. Standing up, he says, "I have waited long for this moment. Your nature fascinates me, for I do not understand it. You will face my creations which have surpassed gods, and you will show me your disposition through battle. Now, choose." You may choose from one of the three exomechs, but ultimately you end up facing all of them, with Draconic making remarks for each one you defeat. He states, "Your performance falls neatly within the margins of error. Ever since I was alerted to your presence, I have processed your battles in order to make my machine stronger. Even now, I monitor your actions. Nothing should escape the bounds of my calculations." Upon defeating the first exomech, he says, "Curious. Very curious." You progress steadily against more difficult challenges, and upon defeating two, he states, "Absurd. I will no longer let my calculations impede my observation of this battle. I shall show you the full fury of my final machine. After defeating all 3 exomechs, he gives you the dialogue. You are an unknown factor. The catalyst is what you are. Nearly as disconnected from this land and its history as I am. Excuse my introspection, I must gather my thoughts after that display. This land has become stale and stiff with blood that has been spilled until now. You have also spilled blood, but it may be enough to usher a new age. Of what? I do not know. But it is something I am eager to see. Now, you wish to reach the tyrant. I cannot assist you in that. It is not a matter of spite, for I would wish nothing more than to observe such a conflict. But you have managed before. You will find a way eventually. I must acknowledge your triumph, but I will now return to my machinery. We are then tasked by Dradon to create his forge, a combination of all the crafting stations into one. And we get access to most of his perspectives on a lot of things, and a lot of lore as well, almost all of which I have already talked about in this video quite thoroughly though. After talking to Dradon for some time, it seems from his lore entries that there is still one more person you haven't contacted yet. Upon building her altar and making contact with her, she laughs and asks if you enjoy going through hell, and then immediately goes to fight you. During the fight, she'll talk to you quite a bit, saying, "You should have just died. It wasn't too long ago you barely managed to defeat my doppelganger. Quite the failure, wasn't it? You've harnessed great power, but you wielded it for no one but yourself. You will suffer greatly. It's absurd to even think of trying to get away. As long as you live, you will suffer. An upstart who recklessly stole and killed their way to power. I wonder, who does that remind me of? You have no stake in this battle. No one gave you any say in this matter. Once the dust has settled and only one remains, if it is you, what value will this have had? Once you defeat her, she tells you that she has no future if she loses here, and that once you have bested her, you will have only one path forward, and that path also has no future. Even if Yharim has thrown all else away, his power still remains. She says that she has no more energy left to resent Yharim anymore, or the Terrarian either, and that it honestly will all be in your hands now. We are then presented with the Cynosure lore item. You now stand at the brink of infinity. The power you have amassed is extraordinary. Valor and deceit, truth and falsehood, loyalty and betrayal. You are beyond these notions. You have rent all asunder as they crossed your path. The very land now bends to your will. Do you not see how the grass parts where you step? How the stars illuminate where you gaze? Terraria itself kneels to you, whether it be out of fear or respect. This is the strength the dragons held, the primordial power they commanded. Little stands between us now. If you did not seek battle with me, I doubt you would have come so far. When you are prepared, seek the grave of the light at the summit of the dragon Eyrie. I await your challenge. You head to the deepest part of the abyss first, the only place on Terraria you haven't explored yet. There, you discover the terminus and return home to activate it. Upon activation, Xeroc's symbol appears in the sky. Xeroc, the first god, speaks to you directly. How long has it been? Centuries? Perhaps even a millennia? I sank this artifact of mine to the deepest depths of the world, to prevent it from ever being used again. You are aware of its existence, and those who are? They know the boundless power it was once able to provide can no longer be taken advantage of. It is a surprise to see there is another who is courageous enough to have retrieved it, particularly given these circumstances. Immortal this time, no less. How interesting. What exactly is it that made you go out of your way to claim what is now nothing more than a decaying stone tablet? Perhaps this is an opportunity. Claiming this relic is no small feat, and I have caught brief glimpses of your journey. You, who claim this artifact that ended an era on your quest to end another. who slew the nameless serpent, who bested even my old friend, the Phoenix, whose power may match the only mortal who has ever made me doubt my own. I wish to test your strength, using fragments of my primordial light taking the form of your past foes. It will be no easy task, yet should you prove yourself strong enough, I will have a proposal for you. Do you believe yourself capable of conquering such a challenge? You will then face off against many different bosses that have been buffed up and scaled up because of his primordial light. Upon completion of his challenge, he tells you this: "A truly excellent display. I see that I was correct. You indeed may be this world's mightiest warrior. However, it seems as though even with that power, it is not enough. I'm afraid I will not be sharing my proposal with you. Though, as a consolation prize, I wish for you to take this ancient stone I carved from the Eyrie. I have long held it as a keepsake of sorts. Though you have failed to meet my requirements, it is unlikely that this will be the only time our paths will cross. Continue to seek greater strength, and when we meet again, perhaps you will have grown enough and power to be worthy. In the meantime, I have my own matters that I must attend to." After this, you have no more things to do anymore. Unless you want to kill the primordial worm, but that just kind of proves how strong the Terrarian is. Xeroc refers to another mortal who had made him doubt his power. I honestly don't see this being any other person besides Yharim, which means that Yharim may be quite a bit more powerful than we think. He also states that he has matters to attend to. What could this mean? Xeroc also refers to Yharim as an old friend. Just a cool tidbit of backstory there. What was Xeroc's proposal? Has Xeroc been in the distortion, essentially being the doom guy of the dimension? Xeroc is honestly the most mysterious character of the whole story. Despite Yharim seemingly being the main protagonist of the story, it honestly looks like the developers are setting up for the distortion and Xeroc to be the real final bosses of the mod pack. But that is all for a future update. Maybe someday we'll get the Xeroc distortion update trailer on our YouTube recommended. But today, this is all that I have for you guys. But before I end the video, I just want to give a quick thank you to the Calamity dev team. Mainly the lore writers for doing what you do. I don't know if you get paid, but either way, no one asks you to write an amazing lore story for a mod pack on Terraria. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that the work you do is admired and appreciated greatly. I also want to thank the people in the lore discussion channel and the Discord for answering my endless slew of questions. But lastly, I want to thank you, the viewer, for watching this far. I put a lot of work into these videos, and it really means a lot to me to see all you guys so interested as much as me. Thank you all, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.